All right, guys, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at D-Day, and for me, I absolutely love this. So passionate about this because this is one of those days that's defining, not just within the context of World War II, not just within the context of U.S. history, but really world history. This is a big one. What can you say about D-Day that hasn't already been said? Because whole libraries worth of work have been devoted to this. But we're going to go ahead and jump in and take a look here because the Allies are going to agree. Now, we've gotten into the war. We got into the war with the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. It's now 1944, or we're approaching 1944. And the Allies have agreed with Joseph Stalin, who is the leader of Russia, right? We've agreed that, yes, we need to open a second front. We always knew that, right? But now it's time, right? He's really pushing for us to make that decision, to make that leap, because it's the Russians who are doing the bulk of the fighting and the bulk of the dying. And if we were to open up another front, it will alleviate some of that pressure because the Germans will have to now fight on two fronts. They'll have to split their troop force. The problem is this is not an easy type of invasion. What we are going to see is that any attack that comes from Great Britain is going to, by nature, be an amphibious assault. And that is incredibly dangerous, incredibly deadly, because you're trying to bring large amounts of troops that are necessary to win this battle from shore or from ship to shore. And that's not something that you can do quickly. You can't just ram ships right up onto the beach. They have to approach slowly. And so that makes them kind of sitting ducks. And the Germans have done everything in their power to slow our approach. They've done all sorts of improvements to the beach or defenses to the beach, like what you see here. This is the hedgehog. You start to see these barriers in low tidal areas. And at the top, they would have placed anti-tank mines. These basically act as mines for approaching ships. And then you had things like the Belgian gates. Anything that they could construct that would withstand the coming and going of the tides and create a barrier for our landing craft, they were going to do that. By creating those barriers, it basically means that our landing craft are going to have to carefully navigate around those in order to approach the beach. And that means that we're going to have to be kind of channeled into certain areas that make it easier for them to hit or disable those landing craft. So there's a lot of things to be considered here. This is the guy that gets charged with planning. This is General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and he is the commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces. It's his job to come up with a plan. Now, he's doing so in concert with a lot of other aides, a lot of other generals, leaders from around the world. But this plan is nicknamed or codenamed Operation Overlord. Today, we know it as D-Day, but the military called it Operation Overlord, and it took them 18 months with some of the most brilliant military minds available. Took them 18 months to plan this thing effectively because of how complex it was. And just to give you an idea of the complexity, what we have here is three major countries. That's the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, all coordinating. But you had troops from many more countries. You had the US, British, and Canadian troops, but you also had Belgian and French and Dutch troops, people from around Europe that had escaped Nazi Germany or Nazi-controlled Europe and were ready to fight their way back into mainland Europe. So you've got language barriers, you've got differences in fighting styles and different types of weapons and so forth. You have to coordinate between a lot of major countries and a lot of different types of soldiers. You also had 7,000 ships. Because it's an amphibious assault, we need naval support and we need landing craft. And I don't know what 7,000 ships in the English Channel would look like, but this is one image. 7,000 is a lot of ships. At its most narrow point, the English Channel is only 7 miles wide. And so to have that many ships filled with men, filled with munitions that are about to start bombarding, that is a massive undertaking. And to make sure that they all knew where they were supposed to be in order to keep themselves safe and others safe, but also to complete their mission is a massive logistical nightmare. In addition to 7,000 ships, you're going to have 12,000 aircraft. Now, I'm going to go over here and show this image as well. I don't know what 12,000 aircraft in the skies look like. We live near a military base, and if we were to see 20 military planes in the sky at one time, that would be impressive, right? That would be a big deal. But to imagine 12,000 and to keep them safe and to have the flight plans where they weren't putting each other in danger, that is a big, big deal. So 12,000 aircraft. Some of them are fighters, some of them are bombers, and a lot of them are going to be troop planes for paratroopers and that sort of thing. In addition to the paratroopers, the planes, and the ships, you're also going to have a combined force of 156,000 troops. That is a lot of troops. But I want to be clear, that's just for day one. The whole idea of D-Day is to create a foothold in mainland Europe. So on day one, we create the foothold. We kind of are able to gain some ground where we can safely bring ashore more troops, more equipment, food, medical supplies, ammunition, all the military equipment that you need to fight this war, because we now have to get them onto mainland Europe. And so D-Day is an important day, but it's just the first day. Every day from this point forward, we have to be pushing into Europe. So this is going to be the largest seaborne invasion in the history of the human race. Never has anything on this scale been attempted before. And we think we might only get one chance at this, one bite at the apple. And so we really are going to try to use disinformation. We want to fool the Germans into thinking that we are going to come and invade from the Dover area over to Calais. It's the narrowest part, so it may be a little bit easier in that respect. When the reality is we're going to invade we're marshaling troops all over Europe, or excuse me, all over Great Britain, and we're going to invade down here in this area of Normandy, these 5 beaches. So how do you trick the German military into believing that the invasion is coming to a place that it isn't? Well, we used all sorts of things, including inflatables, inflatable tanks, inflatable or fake artillery weapons. We set up tents in order to make it look like there was a lot of activity and a lot of soldiers and a lot of marshaling of troops and planning going on there. They parked barges and they reconfigured old decommissioned ships in order to make it look like a lot of military plans were being made. This way, if there was a reconnaissance plane, a German plane flies over at high altitude and takes pictures of what's going on, then they're going to see what you would expect to see if somebody was planning for an invasion. On the flip side of that, where we actually were planning for invasion, we had to really try to camouflage and keep those things out of sight, because if a plane were to fly over and see that, then the gig is up, right? This is problematic. So a lot of camouflage netting, a lot of coordination about where things and how things are going to be stored. In terms of the disinformation, there was even a soldier who had been killed in a training exercise. They took false orders that indicated the time and place of the impending attack. They put him in his pocket and they pushed him out into the English Channel, where they knew the currents would carry him to the French shores. So the hope was that this soldier gets found and that the orders are interpreted as showing that the invasion is going to come in the northern part, further away. We want to do that because if we can convince them that it's coming to Calais, and let me pull back the map here, then the Germans are going to spend more of their time, more of their money, more of their human resources in building up defenses here. If they're building defenses here instead of here, then it's going to be a safer approach for us. So that was the whole goal. Now, when the invasion is actually given a green light multiple times, it's time to go. And ultimately, it's then canceled because of poor weather, high seas, or poor visibility. We have to be able to have visibility for our planes. The seas have to cooperate because not all the vessels are very large, and it's a tightly controlled situation here. So I can't imagine psychologically what the troops had to go through to prepare themselves for a battle where they're going to have to kill or be killed, and to kind of prepare themselves for that, only to have it canceled multiple times. That's a tough deal. Now, this is where we're going to attack. There are 5 beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The United States is responsible for taking Utah and Omaha. The British are responsible for taking Gold and Sword, and the Canadians are responsible for taking Juno. We also have the 82nd and 101st Airborne that's going to be dropped behind enemy lines, as well as the 6th Airborne British Division that's going to be dropped behind enemy lines. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. So that's kind of what D-Day is going to look like, the beaches where we're going to attack. When it's finally given the green light, it's a short window. The weather, the visibility, and the tides and the seas are all cooperating. Then it finally is a go. And Eisenhower is going to broadcast to his troops his message. And this is kind of the pregame talk, right? The coach giving that pregame talk. I love this. I'm going to leave this up here. You can pause it so that you can read through it. But to me, he says a lot in this short thing about the history of this war, about where they have come from versus where they are now. And I think it also says a lot about some of the things that we have going for us here about the home front, right? And what they have provided for us. I make no bones about it. I love our fighting men and the sacrifice that they made, but I think our secret weapon was actually here at home. It was our industrial output and the women and minorities and so many people behind the scenes that did those war jobs. So this was a perfect example of a total war. He gives this incredible message as he sends off the troops into battle. Now, what we're going to see is phase one of the battle really begins the night before D-Day. It begins by dropping 23,000 paratroopers behind enemy lines in order to secure roads and bridges. If we are successful in pushing the Germans back, then they will probably try to slow our advance by blowing up roads, blowing up bridges that we will have to then spend time repairing before we can go over it, at least with heavy machinery. And so the thought was, if we can put people behind enemy lines, we can ambush any Germans who are retreating, and in so doing, we can really protect those bridges. So here we see guys getting into their plane and preparing to leave. The channel stopped you, but not us. Now it's our turn. These guys are ready. They're ready for action. This is what. Oops, sorry. I don't know what 23,000 troopers jumping out of planes looks like, but if this is any indication, it's a pretty impressive sight. Now, we wouldn't have actually seen it because it happened at night, so pictures would have been very difficult to take at that time. A lot of these men died. This was a very, very dangerous operation, particularly for the paratroopers. I've talked to some of the pilots that would share a little bit about these anti-aircraft guns. In the movies, it's like a little puff of smoke, not real scary. In real life, that puff of smoke is an altimeter-charged fragment grenade, meaning it goes up to a certain altitude and then it explodes. And it's pieces of lead that are sharp and they explode with such velocity that they can pierce the plane, the skin of the planes, the fuselage. They can lodge themselves in hydraulic hoses. They can damage the engines. They can kill personnel inside the plane. Even if it doesn't blow up where a plane is going to sustain immediate damage, the force is such that any planes that are flying at a lower altitude are kind of flying through a curtain of lead. This is a very dangerous thing. If these fragment grenades can pierce the metal skin of a fuselage, what can they do to a fabric parachute? What can they do to the human body? And these guys are kind of slowly floating down to earth. They have to contend with all sorts of weaponry being fired at them. They have to deal with fires, hard landings. And because all this was taking place, many of them landed in areas where they weren't supposed to land. They were scattered all over that part of France. And they had to do their best in the dark to link up with other people from their unit and still accomplish their mission. Very, very difficult. All right. So that was phase one. Phase two begins with naval ships early in the morning, pre-dawn, begin to bombard the shore in order to soften German defenses. If you've never seen the U.S. Navy battleships fire the big guns, it's a scary and impressive type of thing to see. And the number of ships that we had that were just absolutely bombarding the beachhead. The goal was to obliterate the artillery weapons, to blow up the pillboxes and the machine gun nests, to get rid of as many of those obstacles as we could so that it made it safer and easier for our troops when they come ashore. The problem, we kind of didn't know our own strength, right? The reality is we blew the crap out of something, but it wasn't the beachheads. In more cases than not, we overshot the beach and then blew the hell out of some farmer's field. And so when our guys come ashore, they're still having to face the realities of machine gun nests, pillboxes, artillery, and all these obstacles. So unfortunately, that phase was not nearly as successful. Now, the landing craft, this is phase 3. This is when our foot soldiers are going to be brought to shore. And this is what it would look like. So they come in very shallow water, and they're able to run directly off of the front of this boat, this landing craft, and onto the sand. Supposed to be able to deliver very quickly a good number of men. It's called a Higgins boat, and the Higgins boat has the capability of carrying about 36 men or a platoon. They have a steel door in the front. That's the heaviest part of the boat. And it is going to act as a ramp. When they get to where it can be released, it's dropped down, and then they run down it like a ramp. The problem is, because that is steel, it's the most reinforced part of this vessel. These things could be easily immobilized, right? And so what we will find is that a number of them get disabled, and when that happens, it creates kind of a traffic jam. And so here we see an example of all of these Higgins boats lined up one right after the other as they prepare to hit the shores. You can see where if one of them gets disabled, the whole line is going to then have to make adjustments both around them and around the obstacles. A good view of those obstacles is going to come right here. This is from an old encyclopedia, but it does a good job of showing some of the distances, what they have to deal with, what an aerial view might have looked like. And so low tide and high tide, we hit at low tide. So they had to maneuver around some of these hedgehogs, some of the things in the water, and then they come ashore. Because it's low tide, we then have 300 to 400 yards of sand to run through. I don't know if you've ever attempted to run through sand, but it is not easy. It's especially not easy when you're laden down with heavy equipment and when people are shooting at you. So once they get up here to this seawall, they have a brief moment of safety, or at least relative safety. You can't stay there for long because you've got hundreds of guys coming up behind you, and you can't all fit behind that wall. So you've got to climb over and try to make it to the base of the cliff where there's another little bit of safety. But in order to do that, you have to go through razor wire or barbed wire. And they tried to blow it apart. They tried to cut it apart with bolt cutters. They tried to flatten it down with different things. I mean, they're trying anything and everything they can do to get over this effectively and efficiently. If they do, then they still have 100 to 200 yards of sand to run through before they reach the base of the cliff. The base of the cliff is relatively safe because the big guns, the ones that look like this right here, are aiming down, and they can't aim down quite at that angle. So there's a little bit of safety. But all of your fellow soldiers that are still landing, that are still trying to run up the beach, they are in harm's way. So there's no rest for the weary. Many of these guys had to free climb up the cliffs in order to be able to fight in close quarters and try to blow these guns up, trying to take over the machine gun nest, try to push the Germans back. I can't even imagine what their nerves would have been like coming ashore on these landing crafts, being under fire, having to climb, only to be faced in very close quarters with the Germans that they have to fight. And they have to do all of that before there can be any semblance of safety. These guys did an absolutely heroic job, and many of them were very young, 17 to 21 when they did it. Some were a bit older, but still, that's a really young age to be asked to do a man-sized job. These guys were absolutely incredible, and we owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. The toll that it takes is big. Now, I want to preface this by saying all of these are very conservative estimates. Most historians are going to put it between 10 and 12,000 or thereabouts. And so this is obviously a conservative, and it estimates that as well, right? It says that it's conservative. So the biggest toll is on the U.S. airborne. More than 10% of those paratroopers are going to be killed in this attack. Some of the beaches, the U.S. had one that was really very light, less than 200 casualties. The UK and actually had a couple of relatively easy, less than 700 and less than 500 comparatively at Gold and Sword. The Canadians had a little tougher time at Juno. They lost 1,200 plus. And again, these are all conservative estimates. But the worst one of all, the one that you see all the footage from, the one is called Bloody Omaha. Omaha Beach was extremely difficult to capture. Well over 2,000 troops are going to be killed in the attempt to take that beach and establish the beachhead there. So very difficult. As I said before, it wasn't just D-Day. I mean, that's what we're talking about, but this had to happen in order to accommodate what was planned for D+1, D+2, the days that followed. Those men made it ashore, but then there were plans to bring, excuse me, there were plans to bring additional troops, heavy equipment, medical supplies, food, all the things that you need to fight a war. And so I think this is a phenomenal picture that really shows just how necessary it was to gain the beachhead so that we could bring all of this equipment ashore. And once they're done offloading theirs, they're going to pull out of there and all these ships are waiting their turn to offload the equipment. Really an incredible logistical thing that took place there. So within 7 days of D-Day, 7 days of the invasion, the Allies control over 80 miles of the French coast. This is, from this day forward, Hitler and Nazi Germany are kind of always on their heels. They'll make a push here or there, but this is the beginning of the end for them. And so from this point forward, we're constantly pushing forward. This is such an incredible day. I hope you continue to learn more about it. I really appreciate you watching. Please make sure that you subscribe. I'd love to hear any comments, especially from anybody who was there or has any remembrance of that day. We owe you an enormous debt of gratitude, and so I want to say thank you. Guys, thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.